Generation C. Who the hell are Generation C? Generation C are digital natives. Digital natives. They are ageless and they are psychographic, a state of mind. And as such, as the desire to communicate digitally grows, they are a generation, the first generation in history that is not bound by a demographic. Now, last week we talked about a quick way to spot different generations by music format. This week we're going to talk about why generations are so wrongly labelled. Now, firstly, I'd like to thank the person who left a brilliant piece on the blog about Generation Jones, saying quite rightly, you've neglected Generation Jones, you've forgotten them. I'd like to acknowledge that was brilliant. You didn't leave your name, so I'd love to hear from you again. And just to acknowledge, there are all sorts of different generations I'm leaving out quite deliberately, just to kind of clear up some really simple things. So thank you for your patience. Let's go back to the boomers, okay? There's a really important point here. Both generational studies people and the public at large tend to talk about generations in terms of what they're doing. They talk about, for example, people brought up in the 60s and 70s as being into flower power, about being into drugs and rock and roll. They talk about the fact that this generation was into kind of hippie stuff and loose clothing. Now, we all know those are stereotypes, don't we? We all know that not everybody in that generation wore an Afghan coat and smoked dope. Okay, it's clearly ridiculous. Because what we need to understand is the difference between what a generation is perceived to be doing and who they really are. Now, the point is a generation has aspirational values. So let me be absolutely clear about this. That represented that generation, Bob Dylan, those kind of people. Those sort of people were a symbol of freedom. They were a symbol of being able to let rip, and partly because of the pill and all sorts of other things. That was a generation that truly had more freedom than any of its previous ones. But that doesn't mean to say that all that generation were into drugs and rock and roll. It doesn't mean to say they were all into protesting. What it means is that a significant portion of that generation aspired to the values of freedom. And this is why it's really important, and this is why people label generations wrongly. It is not true to say that all of that generation were into all of those activities that we stereotypically associate with it. What is true to say is that some of them were into those activities, some not. But there was a common value around freedom. Now, Generation C is exactly the same. People talk about community, they talk about celebrity, they talk about different channels, them liking text and so on. There are actually about 20 different C's being bandied about. The point is, we aren't human doings. We are human beings, and Generation C are human beings. And that common value that they're aspiring to, is the idea of choice. The idea that in a world that's complex and overwhelmed with choices, they can take control and express themselves. So their label is a label of human beingness. It's a combative. And I hope that's cleared that up. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week.